long before the days of the crusty crab, long before the clinking of coins filled his dreams. There was only the sea and a young crab who had not yet discovered his place in the world. His name was Eugene. Not like Mr. Krabs, not the hardened sailor, not the greedy businessman of later years, just Eugene. A crab with restless eyes, a heart that longed for more, and claws that trembled whenever he stood too close to the rolling tide. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, blue by day, silver by night, and always alive with a voice that seemed to whisper directly to his soul. The tide called him, sang to him, and sometimes even scolded him. He was not afraid of it. No, never afraid. Instead, he listened. Even as a boy, he could sit for hours upon a rock by the shore, legs tucked close, chin resting against the curve of his shell, staring out into the horizon as though it might blink back at him. In those quiet moments, when the world around him was hushed except for the steady rhythm of the waves, he imagined what lay beyond. He saw distant islands in his mind, places marked only by question marks and maps too old and torn to be trusted. He imagined buried chests overflowing with riches that glittered brighter than stars. But most of all, he dreamed of freedom. Freedom from the small shack he called home. Freedom from the same sandy streets. Freedom to drift where the tide carried him. His shack was little more than driftwood pieced together. A crooked roof leaned heavily to one side, and a single lantern swung outside, creaking whenever the wind brushed past. Inside there wasn't much. An old hammock strung between two beams, a shelf with seashells he had collected, and a chest containing a few simple belongings. The air smelled of salt, always salt, and the floor was often damp with the spray of the sea. Yet Eugene loved it. To him, the shack was not small. It was a doorway, standing just close enough to the shore that the lull of the waves became his bedtime song. Every night, when the sun slid into the horizon and the sky blushed pink, Eugene would light his lantern. Its glow was weak, a trembling flame that painted the walls with gold shadows, but it was enough. He would curl into his hammock, rocking gently, and close his eyes. The sea would speak to him then, in tones soft and endless. It told stories in the rush of the tide, in the hush of the foam that kissed the rocks, in the sigh of waves that rose and fell without hurry. Sometimes, if he listened carefully, Eugene thought he heard voices, old voices, deep and gravelly, as though sailors from ages past were still lingering out there on the swells. They told him tales of storms, of ships that sailed too far, of treasures swallowed whole by the deep. And even though the stories were laced with danger, he found them soothing. The sea was not cruel, not to him. It was vast, it was powerful. But it was also steady. It had no beginning, no ending. And because of that, he felt safe. On nights when the moon was bright, he would slip outside and stand on the sand, claws resting at his sides, eyes lifted toward the horizon. The water gleamed like a liquid silver, rolling toward him in gentle sighs. The stars reflected faintly on its surface so that when he gazed out, it seemed as though he were standing at the edge of two skies, the one above filled with constellations and the one below rippling and restless. He could stand like that for hours, breathing in the salt air, feeling the mist settle on his shell. No one else was awake then. The little town behind him slept quietly, windows dark, chimneys silent. Only Eugene and the sea remained. And in those hushed hours, the idea of becoming a sailor began to take root. He did not yet think of himself as a pirate. He was too young, too untested, to give himself such a daring title. But a sailor, yes, that felt right. Someone who moved with the tide, someone who let the horizon lead the way, Someone who understood that maps were only suggestions, not instructions. Still, Eugene was not without doubts. He was a crab, small in comparison to the vast creatures of the deep. What could he possibly do against the ocean's power? And yet, every whisper of the tide reassured him. Every slow crash of water against the rocks seemed to tell him, "You belong here. You are not too small." The sea remembers even the tiniest shell. So Eugene dreamed. He dreamed of ships with tall masts, sails billowing in the wind. He dreamed of crewmates, singing songs under the stars, their voices carrying across the waves like lullabies. He dreamed of journeys that stretched into endless days and nights, where the line between waking and dreaming blurred into one. And when he finally drifted into sleep, with the lantern glowing faintly beside him, he carried those dreams with him. His mind would wander over calm seas, under velvet skies, chasing horizons he had never seen but somehow already knew. For the ocean was already guiding him, gently, patiently, endlessly, toward the life he was destined to lead. Some mornings, Eugene would rise before the sun. The horizon would still be quiet, painted in faint shades of gray and lavender, with only the faintest shimmer of light to show where the day was about to begin. He liked those hours best, when the world seemed paused, as though holding its breath, waiting for the first golden line of sunlight to touch the water. He would sit upon the same rock where he spent so many nights, claws folded neatly, eyes wide, and listen. The hush of the sea was different in the early dawn. It was slower, gentler, as though the tides themselves were drowsy, not yet fully awake. The gulls would stir above, wings flapping lazily as they called to one another, and far out to sea shadows of ships might appear, silhouettes of distant sailors already on their way. Eugene would imagine himself upon one of those ships, feeling the deck roll beneath his feet, smelling salt and wood and fresh sails all at once. He could see himself standing proudly at the bow, claws gripping the railing, his gaze steady on the horizon. The image filled him with both excitement and a quiet ache. He wanted it so badly, and yet he did not yet know how to make the dream real. His little shack by the shore was safe, comfortable in its own way, but it was also still. Eugene's heart was not still. It beat with the rhythm of tides, restless, eager, longing. He could not remain there forever. The sea had already chosen him, even if he had not yet chosen it fully in return. Sometimes he would wander the tide pools, his reflection rippling in the shallow water. Small fish darted away from his shadow, snails clung lazily to the rocks, and crabs smaller than him scuttled across the sand. To anyone else it was ordinary, but to Eugene even the smallest pool seemed to hold secrets. The world beneath the water was always whispering, always alive with mysteries. At night, when sleep was slow to come, he would think of those mysteries. What lived in the deepest trenches where light never reached? What treasures lay buried beneath coral and sand, waiting for a brave soul to uncover them? And most of all, what would it feel like to live not on the edge of the ocean, but upon it, riding the swells, part of its endless rhythm? The answers never came, not clearly. Only the sea itself responded, murmuring softly against the shore. Yet Eugene did not grow frustrated. No, he grew patient. Listening was enough. Each wave was like a page in a book too large to finish. And night by night, dawn by dawn, he was learning to read it. He remembered one evening, more vivid than the others, when the tide was unusually high. The waves rushed farther than usual, curling up toward his shack, licking the edges of the sand beneath his door. He sat outside, the lantern glowing faintly beside him, and watched the water shimmer with moonlight. It was as though the ocean was reaching out, closer and closer, stretching its fingers toward him. The air was cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of salt. The sound of the waves was deeper, more powerful, yet not frightening. To Eugene, it felt almost like a promise. The sea was reminding him, "I will come for you, in time. Be ready." That night he dreamed vividly. In his sleep he saw himself standing upon a great vessel, the sails stretched wide above him, like the wings of some grand bird. The stars were brighter than he had ever seen, filling the sky until it seemed no darkness remained at all. The ship moved smoothly, almost silently, as though it were part of the water itself. He stood at its heart, and though no crew surrounded him, he did not feel alone. The ocean itself was his companion, and its endless voice sang to him, a lullaby woven of tides and foam. When he awoke, the dream lingered like mist. He lay in his hammock for a long while, the lantern's flame flickering weakly beside him, and wondered if dreams could be omens. Could the sea truly be showing him his future? Or was it only his own yearning playing tricks upon his mind? It didn't matter. The dream had planted itself deep inside him, growing roots that wrapped tightly around his heart. He could no longer imagine a life spent only on shore. He needed to sail, to discover, to follow that whisper wherever it led him. The days that followed seemed to move slower, though in truth they were the same as ever. The townsfolk bustled about. Fishermen pulled in their nets, and children played along the sand. Eugene did the small jobs he could find, earning just enough to keep his lantern burning and his hammock strung. Yet with each passing evening, when he returned to his shack and watched the tide roll in, he felt the pull grow stronger. The sea was waiting. He could feel it. Every whisper of the tide told him the same thing. Not yet, but soon. Eugene often wondered if the ocean chose its sailors. Some were pulled to it like gulls to the wind, unable to resist its call, while others lived their whole lives near the shore, yet never felt the urge to leave. He knew which type he was. The sea had claimed him long before he understood why, and every evening its voice pressed deeper into his thoughts. The townsfolk sometimes teased him for his long hours of sitting by the water staring out at nothing. "That crab's dreaming of riches he'll never see," they would chuckle, shaking their heads. But Eugene didn't mind. Let them laugh. They could not hear what he heard. They did not feel the steady tug that seemed to pull from somewhere beyond the horizon, as though a hand unseen had tied a rope around his heart and was slowly reeling him in. There was a rhythm to the days now. Work, chores, food, and then always the sea. He could not go without listening to it. The hush of the waves was more than a comfort. It was a necessity, like breath itself. Without it, he felt restless, as though something important had gone missing. At night, when the stars stretched wide above, Eugene sometimes thought about his father. He remembered faintly, a strong figure, a voice that carried stories of the old days. But those memories were distant, like shells buried deep in the sand. His father had been a sailor too, though Eugene had been too young to ask about the journeys, the storms, the treasures, and the tides. He wondered if the sea's whispers were his father's way of guiding him forward, urging him to continue the life he could not. One evening, the air was especially still. The gulls were quiet, the wind soft, and the waves moved with a gentleness that seemed almost deliberate. Eugene sat on the sand, his claws resting lightly on his knees, and listened with all the focus he could gather. The sea spoke, not in words, not in any language he could repeat aloud, but in feelings. He felt warmth, like the glow of sunlight on his shell. He felt adventure, wild and untamed, rushing through him like a strong current. He felt warning, too, sharp and sudden, like the sting of salt in the eyes. But above all, he felt belonging. And then, just for a moment, he heard something more, a sound unlike any other. Not the crash of waves, not the hiss of foam, but a low, rumbling murmur, far out in the deep. It was like the ocean itself had sighed, tired and eternal. A sound so vast that Eugene's small heart quivered in awe. He whispered into the night, barely daring to speak, "I hear you." The tide rolled forward as if in answer, brushing cool water against his feet. That night he lay awake in his hammock longer than usual. The lantern flickered and faded, casting shadows that wavered on the wooden walls. Eugene's claws traced the fabric of the hammock absent-mindedly, and his mind wandered. What would it take, he wondered, to leave, to step aboard a ship, to sail beyond the horizon, to live the life he dreamed of? He had no vessel, no crew, no coin. Yet deep inside he felt certain the day would come when those things would not matter. The sea had already marked him. Opportunity would find him. And so he waited, patient, restless, hopeful. Days turned to weeks. He worked odd tasks around the docks, learning little by little about ships, the ropes, the sails, the way a hull curved to meet the water. He listened to old sailors tell tales, some outrageous, some sorrowful. They spoke of distant islands where fruits grew as large as barrels, of whirlpools that swallowed entire fleets, of creatures with eyes like lanterns lurking in the trenches. Eugene stored every word away like coins in a chest. To others, they were just stories. To him, they were lessons, hints of the world that awaited him. Each tale added another layer to his dreams, another reason to trust the whispers of the tide. Sometimes, when he walked home at night, he would stop on the dock and lean against the posts, gazing at the black water below. The reflection of the moon shimmered on its surface, broken by ripples that spread outward, vanishing into the dark. He imagined that Ripple was him, small at first, but growing, traveling farther, touching shores he had never seen. One night he placed his claw gently on the water, letting the chill creep up his arm. "I'll follow you," he murmured, "wherever you lead." The ocean did not answer in words, but the tide swelled just a little, nudging against the dock like a nod. And Eugene smiled, his heart full of both fear and certainty. The sea had whispered its promise. Soon it would call him fully. The nights grew longer as the season shifted. The air carried a sharper chill, and the waves took on a slower, heavier tone as though the sea itself were settling into slumber. Eugene noticed the change and welcomed it, for even the quieting of the ocean had a rhythm worth listening to. He wrapped himself in a thin blanket inside his shack, lantern glowing dim, and let the deeper hush of the tide become his companion. One particular evening, the moon was veiled by clouds, and the shoreline lay in shadow. The water was dark, darker than ink, and the breeze smelled of rain. Eugene sat outside regardless, his legs folded on the sand, listening with his eyes closed. The sea was different that night, not angry, not wild, but secretive. Each wave seemed to carry a hush of caution, as though telling him, not everything is meant to be known too soon. It was the first time Eugene felt the ocean holding back, keeping some of its stories hidden beneath the swell. He opened his eyes slowly, watching the faint outlines of the waves roll forward and fade again. The ocean was not only teacher and friend, it was also guardian of its mysteries. Eugene understood. He was still young, still learning. There were treasures he could not yet grasp, secrets he was not yet ready to carry. That realization did not discourage him. It steadied him. for even patience was part of the sailor's craft. The tides would reveal what they wished when the time was right. The next morning, rain did fall, tapping against the roof of the shack, seeping in through small cracks. Eugene stayed inside, curled in his hammock, the blanket pulled close. The rhythm of raindrops was different from the tide, but it lulled him all the same. He thought of the sailors he'd seen on distant ships, their silhouettes moving against the horizon, and wondered how they fared during storms far from shore. Did they, too, find comfort in the steady drumming of water? Or did the sea test them with harsher voices, wilder than anything he had known here on land? As the day faded, the rain softened to a drizzle, and the tide returned to its steady pulse. Eugene stepped outside, the air fresh with the scent of storms washed clean, and gazed once more at the horizon. A faint band of light glowed there, the last remnant of sunset. Beyond it lay the unknown. He whispered softly, almost shyly, "One day I'll find you." Weeks passed, and his yearning only deepened. By now he could not imagine life without the sea's constant murmur. The sound filled his dreams, his mornings, his every quiet thought. Even in the bustle of town, when laughter and chatter surrounded him, he would catch himself listening for the faintest echo of waves. The townsfolk still teased, some calling him foolish, some shaking their heads as though he were wasting his time. But Eugene did not waver. He knew the difference between noise and truth. Their words were noise. The sea was truth. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, Eugene noticed a ship closer than usual. It was anchored not far from the shore, sails lowered, its wooden hull gleaming with the colors of twilight. He could hear faint voices drifting over the water, rough, hearty laughter, the kind only sailors carried. His heart pounded. Here it was, proof of the life he longed for, so near he could almost touch it. He stayed on the sand until the stars appeared, watching the lanterns flicker on the deck. Something inside him stirred, sharp and undeniable. It was not yet time to join them, not yet, but he felt it approaching. The sea was bringing the world closer, step by step, wave by wave. He only had to wait. That night he dreamed again. He stood on the deck of a ship that stretched endlessly, sails like great white wings above him. The stars shifted overhead, forming constellations he had never seen. And from the dark water below rose voices, not frightening but soothing, ancient voices that sang of journeys of treasure, of tides that never ceased. He woke with tears in his eyes and salt on his lips, though whether from the sea spray that had slipped through the cracks of his shack, or from the dream itself, he could not say. The days grew gentler after that, as though the sea, too, was preparing him. The whispers in the tide softened, more patient, more guiding than ever. He felt no rush anymore, no sharp ache. Instead, he carried a calm certainty. The ocean had chosen him. That much was clear. And while he did not yet know when the call would come, he knew with all his being that it would. And so Eugene lived in the waiting, listening, learning, dreaming. Each wave that broke against the shore carried another secret, another promise, another reminder that the sea was endless, and so too was his journey. When he closed his eyes at night, the lantern glowing faintly beside him, he whispered the same words he had spoken since boyhood, words that carried across the tide like a vow. "I'll follow ye, wherever ye lead." The sea answered, not in words, but in rhythm, wave after wave, a lullaby that would guide him from boyhood to the life that awaited beyond the horizon. The sea had whispered for years, and Eugene listened. He waited, patient and steady, until the day came when waiting was no longer enough. It began, as many great stories do, with a sound carried on the wind. It was the low creak of a ship's mast, drifting from a hidden cove not far beyond the cliffs. Eugene had walked there many times before, following the tide pools and gull paths, but this evening was different. The breeze carried with it something new, wood groaning under weight, ropes slapping gently, and the faint murmur of voices not belonging to the sleepy town. His heart stirred. A ship. Climbing over the rocks, his claws scraping against barnacles, Eugene reached the overlook and peered down into the cove. There she was. A vessel weathered by years of storms, her sails patched, her hull dark and scarred. Yet to his eyes, she was magnificent. The lanterns on her deck flickered in the dusk, painting the water with trembling streaks of gold. A crew bustled quietly about, repairing nets, checking barrels, and sharing hushed laughter. They were not the neat, polished sailors of the Navy. No, these were wanderers, pirates some would call them. But to Eugene they were the embodiment of every dream the sea had planted in him. Free, untethered, alive. At the head of them all stood the captain. A tall, broad-shouldered lobster with one claw larger than the other, his shell weathered like driftwood, his eyes sharp and scarred from years of salt and sun. His name was Redfin. The sea itself seemed carved into his very being, and when he spoke, even softly, the air around him carried weight. Eugene lingered in the shadows, hardly daring to breathe, until the captain's gaze turned upward. Their eyes met. For a long moment, the young crab felt exposed, as if the tide had pulled away and left him bare on the sand. Yet the lobster did not frown. Instead, Redfin lifted his great claw slowly, gesturing for Eugene to come down. The boy's heart thundered. His legs moved before his mind could protest, carrying him down the rocks, closer and closer to the vessel he had dreamed of all his life. When his feet touched the sand of the cove, the crew turned, curious but not hostile. Redfin studied him in silence, then rumbled, in a voice deep as the ocean floor. "You've been listening to the sea, haven't you, boy?" Eugene blinked, startled. "Aye," he whispered, though he didn't know how the captain could have known. Redfin's mouth curled into the faintest smile. "The sea whispers only to those who belong to it. And I can see it in your eyes. You're one of us." The crew chuckled, some shaking their heads, others shrugging as though this were nothing new. Many had likely been found this way, drawn to the ship not by coin, but by calling. Redfin's gaze sharpened. "So, boy, do you have the claws for the work? The sea takes more than it gives. Can ye endure the hunger, the storms, the silence of the deep?" Eugene swallowed, his chest tight. Every word was a test. He thought of his shack, his hammock, the lantern that glowed weakly each night. He thought of the tide's endless whispers. He thought of every dream he had carried since boyhood. "I can," he said firmly. "If the sea calls me, I'll answer." The captain gave a single nod, then welcome aboard. And just like that, the course of his life changed. That night, Eugene stepped onto the deck of the ship for the first time. The wood beneath his feet swayed gently, alive with the tide. Lanterns swung overhead, casting soft circles of light that rocked with the rhythm of the waves. The crew moved about, some laughing quietly, others rolling barrels into place, the sounds blending into a soothing symphony of work and water. Eugene stood at the railing, claws gripping the worn wood, and looked out across the cove. The stars glittered above, mirrored faintly in the black water below. The town lay behind him, small and distant, already fading into memory. Ahead lay only the horizon, dark and endless. He felt no fear, only belonging. That night he did not sleep in his hammock by the shack. Instead he lay curled in a rough net slung between two beams of the lower deck, the air thick with the smell of salt, tar, and rope. Around him, the crew murmured softly, some humming, some snoring, all lulled by the rocking of the sea. Eugene closed his eyes, and the ocean whispered, as it always had. Only this time it whispered from beneath him, through the timbers of the ship itself. It was deeper, closer, more alive. And for the first time, he felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. Life aboard the ship was nothing like life on shore. The first thing Eugene noticed was the sound. On land, the ocean had always spoken in whispers, gentle and patient. But aboard the vessel, the sea's voice was louder, closer, and constant. The creak of wood, the snap of sails, the hiss of water cutting against the hull. It was a chorus, and Eugene had to learn its rhythm quickly. The crew wasted no time in putting him to work. At dawn, before the sun had fully broken over the horizon, a rough hand shook him awake. "Up, lad," a burly clam barked, tossing him a coil of rope. "Let's see if your claws can tie a knot." Eugene stumbled to his feet, still groggy, but his heart leapt at the task. He had seen knots tied before, sailors looping ropes with speed and ease, but his own claws fumbled awkwardly. The rope slipped, the knot came loose, and the crew around him chuckled. "Too green," someone muttered. But Eugene didn't flinch. He tried again, and again. The rope burned against his shell. The knot fell apart more than once. But little by little, the pattern began to make sense. The rope twisted, looped, pulled tight. At last, the knot held firm. The clam gave a grunt of approval. "Not bad for a first try. You'll learn." That was the way of it. The crew pushed him hard, but never cruelly. They teased him when he fumbled, laughed when he slipped. Yet behind every chuckle was a strange kind of patience. They had all been new once, they seemed to say, and the sea had shaped them just as it would shape him. Days passed, each one bringing new lessons. He learned to coil ropes neatly so they would not tangle in storms. He learned to scrub the deck until it shone, the salt crust flaking away under his claws. He learned to climb the rigging, heart pounding as the sails flapped beside him, the world spinning below. It was hard work, grueling at times. His claws ached, his shells scraped against wood and rope. His body rocked with exhaustion. Yet every night, when he lay in his net on the lower deck, he felt a deep contentment. For every task brought him closer to belonging. Every bruise and scrape was proof that he was becoming part of the ship's story. The captain, Redfin, rarely gave direct orders to Eugene at first. Instead, he watched. His scarred eyes followed the young crab's progress as he stumbled through mistakes and stubbornly tried again. At last, one evening, as the sun sank low and the crew coiled ropes for the night, Redfin called to him. Boy, walk with me." Eugene's claws trembled slightly as he followed the captain to the bow. The sea stretched endless ahead, glowing faintly in the fading light. Redfin stood silent for a moment, his massive claw resting on the railing. Then he spoke, his voice slow and deep. "The sea tests every soul who sails her. She don't care for greed or pride. She'll grind both to sand. What she wants is patience, endurance, the will to keep moving, even when every wave knocks you back. That's what makes a sailor, not gold, not glory." Eugene listened intently, the words sinking into him like stones into the deep. Redfin turned, his eyes steady on the young crab. "I see the sea's mark on ye. I knew it the moment I looked at ye in that cove. But mark this, boy. The sea may call, but it's your choice to answer. Once you give yourself to her, there's no turning back. Do you understand?" Eugene swallowed hard. His chest felt heavy and light at the same time. He thought of his shack, the quiet lantern, the whispering tide that had lulled him since boyhood. And he thought of this moment, standing on a ship, the horizon stretched before him. "I understand," he said softly. Redfin nodded, his expression unreadable. Then he clapped his massive claw on Eugene's shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. "Good. Then you're one of us now." That night, the crew shared a simple meal of salted fish and bread. Eugene sat among them, listening to their stories. They spoke of storms survived, of ports filled with strange music, of battles fought and treasures lost. Their voices rose and fell like waves themselves, carrying laughter, sorrow, and pride all at once. Eugene didn't add much. He was content to listen. Every tale was a glimpse of the life ahead, every word another thread tying him more firmly to the sea. Oh, when he finally lay in his hammock, the ship rocking gently beneath him, Eugene felt the tides whisper once more. Only now it was different. It was no longer the call of a stranger. It was the murmur of a companion, deep and steady, welcoming him home. The first weeks aboard the ship blurred together in a rhythm of work and water. Eugene woke before dawn, worked until his claws ached, and slept to the lull of waves pressing against the hull. At first it was overwhelming. The sheer amount of tasks, the endless lists of knots, sails, barrels, and tools. But slowly his body adjusted. The work that once left him trembling now built strength in his limbs. The sway of the ship, which had nearly toppled him on the first day, became second nature. Still, there were trials. The sea was not always gentle, and even small storms tested the crew's resolve. Eugene's first taste came one cloudy evening, when the horizon turned dark and the wind shifted suddenly. Redfin's booming voice echoed across the deck. "Storm's coming. Secure the sails." The crew sprang into motion. Eugene followed, scrambling to pull ropes and tighten knots as the wind howled louder. The sails cracked like whips overhead, snapping in the growing gale. Rain began to fall, cold and stinging, and the waves swelled beneath the hull. Eugene's claws shook as he fumbled with a rope, the wet fibers slick and unyielding. For a moment, panic seized him. The ship he had longed for, the life he had dreamed of, suddenly felt too large, too wild, too dangerous. He was small, a single crab against the endless power of the sea. "Hold steady, lad," a crewman shouted, gripping his shoulder and guiding his claws. "Don't fight the rope. Work with it." He tried again, breathing slowly, letting the rope slide just enough before pulling tight. At last, the knot held. The sail steadied, catching the wind rather than thrashing against it. Relief washed over him, though it was short-lived as another command rang out, and then another. He raced from task to task. Claws raw, shells soaked, heart pounding like a drum. Hours later, the storm eased. The clouds broke, stars blinking faintly through the mist, and the sea calmed to a restless murmur. The crew slumped in exhaustion, some laughing, some sighing, all grateful to have weathered the trial. Eugene collapsed onto the deck, chest heaving, every muscle aching. Redfin passed by, his large claw resting briefly on Eugene's shoulder. "You did well," he rumbled, and then moved on. It was only a few words, but they glowed in Eugene's chest like firelight. After the storm, Eugene's respect for the crew deepened. These were not just wanderers or dreamers, they were survivors. They faced the sea's fury without hesitation, trusting in one another and in their own skill. He wanted to be like them, steady and unshaken, no matter what the tide brought. So he listened. He learned. He asked questions when he could, though often the lessons came through observation. He watched the way the helmsman leaned into the wheel, the way the lookout scanned the horizon, the way the cook, rationed supplies carefully so no one went hungry. Every action carried meaning, and Eugene absorbed it all like a sponge soaking up salt water. At night, the lessons continued in softer ways. The crew told stories as they rested, tales of ports where music played until dawn, of strange creatures glimpsed beneath the waves, of ships lost and never found again. Some spoke of treasure, glittering and grand. Others spoke of loss, the kind that hollowed the heart but never silenced the sea's call. Eugene didn't know which tales were true and which were shaped by imagination. It didn't matter. Each story carried the same undercurrent. The sea gave, the sea took, and the sailor's life was to accept both with equal measure. There were lighter moments, too. The crew, rough though they were, had their own kind of humor. They laughed at spilled buckets, at knots tied backward, at the way Eugene once tripped over a coil of rope and nearly tumbled headfirst into a barrel. They teased him for his youth, for the gleam in his eyes whenever he stared too long at the horizon. But beneath the teasing was warmth. They called him Lad and Green Claw, yet when meals were shared, he was given a place among them. When the watch was long and cold, someone always nudged him awake with a grin rather than anger. Bit by bit, Eugene was no longer just a boy tagging along. He was becoming part of the crew. And with every passing day, the tide's whisper grew clearer. It was no longer a distant call from the shore. It was a presence all around him, in the creak of wood, the flap of sails, the roll of waves. It filled his ears as he worked, hummed beneath his dreams as he slept, and guided him with patience. The sea was not done shaping him. He could feel it in his shell, in his heart, in every whisper that carried across the water. He was not just Eugene anymore. He was Eugene the sailor. And though he did not yet know it, the horizon was already preparing his next test. It happened one night when the moon hung low, silvering the waves with a ghostly light. The ship had been sailing steady for weeks, the wind kind and the waters calm. Eugene was on deck, coiling rope while humming softly to himself when the lookout's cry pierced the quiet. Ship off the starboard bow. The crew rushed to the rail, eyes straining to the dark. At first, Eugene saw nothing. Then a shape, faint and looming, cutting across the horizon. The vessel was smaller than theirs, its sails patched and tattered, but it moved with purpose. And then, faintly, a lantern signal flashed across the water. Redfin's eyes narrowed. "Pirates," he muttered. The word sent a shiver through Eugene's shell. He had imagined pirates before, wild, daring, fearsome, but imagining and facing them were two very different things. The crew grew tense, though none showed fear outright. Some gripped ropes, others fetched weapons hidden in barrels. The air thickened, every breath heavy with expectation. "Steady," Redfin ordered. "They may test us, but they'll find we're not easy prey." The smaller vessel drew closer. Eugene's claws trembled as he clutched the railing, torn between fascination and dread. Shadows moved on the enemy deck, figures hunched and armed. A voice, rough and mocking, carried across the waves. "Ahoy there! Drop your goods, and we'll let you sail free." The crew around Eugene chuckled darkly, though the sound was more grim than amused. Redfin raised his claw, his voice booming back, "Come and take them, if you dare." The challenge rang through the night like a drumbeat. The smaller ship adjusted course, aiming to close the distance. Grappling hooks were thrown, clanging against the rail, and within moments, shadows vaulted across the gap. Pirates swarmed onto the deck. Eugene froze. The chaos unfolded in a blur, steel clashing, voices shouting, bodies moving with frightening speed. The crew of Redfin's ship fought fiercely, pushing back the invaders with strength and unity. But Eugene stood rooted, claws empty, heart hammering. He was no fighter. He had no weapon, no training. A pirate spotted him, tall with jagged teeth and a cruel laugh. "Easy pickings," the pirate sneered, lunging toward him. Instinct took over. Eugene ducked, claws snapping out wildly. His claw caught the pirate's wrist, surprising both of them. The pirate cursed, yanking free, and swung again. Eugene stumbled back, panic blazing in his chest. Then he remembered Redfin's words. The sea don't care for pride. She tests patience, endurance, the will to keep moving. Eugene took a breath, steadying himself. He couldn't fight like the others, but perhaps he didn't need to. His eyes darted to the ropes nearby, the lines that held the sails steady. Without thinking, he grabbed a coil, twisted it around a post, and hurled the loose end toward the pirate. The rope tangled around the attacker's legs, tripping him hard onto the deck. The crew erupted in cheers. "Well done, lad," someone bellowed, before charging past to deal with another foe. Eugene barely had time to breathe before another pirate advanced. But now his fear had shifted. He was still trembling, yes, but no longer frozen. He grabbed another rope, this time looping it with a knot he had practiced endlessly. The line snapped tight around the pirate's arm, jerking him back long enough for a crewman to send him sprawling. By the end of the skirmish, the invaders were retreating, dragging their wounded back to their battered ship. They cast off into the dark, curses echoing faintly across the water. Redfin's crew raised a cheer, bruised but triumphant. And Eugene? Eugene stood among them, claws still shaking, heart pounding, but standing. Later, as the deck quieted and the injured were tended to, Redfin approached him. His scarred face was unreadable in the lantern glow. For a long moment, the captain simply studied him, saying nothing. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't freeze. You thought. Used the ship. Used what you knew. That's what makes a sailor, boy. Not swinging a blade. Using your wits when the sea throws danger at you." Eugene swallowed, unsure what to say. But the captain spared him the trouble. Redfin lifted his claw and tapped it firmly against Eugene's shell. "You're one of us now, not just in name, in truth." The words sank deeper than any treasure could. Eugene had longed to belong, to be part of something greater than himself. Tonight, he had proven he could stand alongside them. Not as a child chasing dreams, but as a sailor who had faced the tide's test and held firm. As the crew settled for the night, exhausted but victorious, Eugene lay in his hammock, staring up at the beams of the ship. The tide's whisper filled his ears once more, low and steady. But now it carried a new tone. Not just welcome, not just promise. Pride. And beneath it, a certainty that this was only the beginning. The sea had claimed him, and he had claimed her in return. The days following the pirate skirmish passed with an unusual calm. The sea, as though satisfied by the test it had given, rolled gently beneath the ship's hull, rocking it like a cradle. The sails hung fat with a steady breeze. The sun burned bright by day, and the moon rose full and golden at night. For Eugene, every hour held a new rhythm, ropes to coil, decks to scrub, sails to adjust. The work was hard, but it was honest, and with every knot tied, with every wave endured, he felt the sea accepting him further into her embrace. But one evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, and the sky deepened to indigo, something changed. The lookout's voice called down, sharp and curious. "Captain, there's something on the water off the port side." The crew gathered at the rail. Eugene squeezed in between two older sailors, squinting against the fading light. At first, he saw nothing but endless water, glittering like scattered jewels. Then a faint shadow came into view, bobbing on the waves. As they drew closer, the shape took form, a battered chest, half submerged, its wood swollen and blackened by the sea. With effort, the crew hauled it aboard. It was heavy, barnacle-clad, and wrapped in ropes frayed to threads. The chest's lock had long rusted away, so with a few strikes of a cutlass, it sprang open. Inside lay a collection of waterlogged papers, scraps of fabric, and, most intriguing of all, a rolled-up parchment, sealed with wax that had nearly dissolved. Redfin himself lifted it carefully, unrolling it beneath the lantern glow. The crew leaned in, breaths held. Lines emerged, faded ink sketching out rough shapes. An island not marked on any known charts. Around it, swirls of ink suggested reefs or perhaps dangerous currents. At its center, a jagged mark stood boldly as though scratched in haste. The sailors murmured among themselves. "A map," one whispered. "To treasure," said another, eyes gleaming. But there was something else, too. On the edge of the parchment, words had been scrawled in a hand, both hurried and trembling. "Beware the island that hides itself, for its riches are guarded by the sea's own curse." The crew fell silent. The words lingered in the air like a chill draft. Eugene felt it crawl along his shell. Redfin's gaze swept over his men, finally settling on the map again. His scarred mouth curved into something between a grin and a grimace. "Cursed or not, gold is gold," he growled. "We'll chart a course." The cheer that followed was cautious but eager. Sailors lived for such whispers, for the promise of riches just out of reach. Eugene, though, could not shake the unease that gnawed at him. Something about the map felt alive, as if the ink itself carried whispers from the deep. The voyage that followed was unlike any Eugene had known. They sailed away from familiar routes, chasing the cryptic bearings scratched onto the parchment. The waters grew stranger the farther they went. The skies often dimmed even at noon, and fog rolled across the surface like ghostly veils. The compass spun wildly at times, refusing to settle, and the crew muttered that the sea itself sought to keep the island hidden. Eugene felt the weight of the journey in his bones. He dreamed often, restless visions of shadows in the deep, of an island rising out of the mist, only to vanish when he reached for it. Yet, alongside the unease, a flicker of excitement burned within him. If the island held secrets, perhaps it also held the chance to prove himself further, to uncover something no sailor before had claimed. One night, when the stars shone faint and distant as though through a veil, Eugene found himself standing near the rail, gazing into the dark waters. The tide whispered softly, but the sound was different, deeper, layered, as though it carried voices just beneath the waves. "Thinking, boy?" Eugene turned. It was Redfin, his massive frame looming in the dim lantern light. "Aye, Captain," Eugene admitted, wondering what lies ahead. Redfin's eyes gleamed, hard and knowing. Every sailor wonders. The sea don't answer, not straight. She gives signs, riddles. That map, it's one of her riddles. Dangerous, maybe. But if you've the heart, the sea rewards boldness. Eugene hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the chest was open. "Do you believe in curses, Captain?" Redfin chuckled, low and rough. "I believe in fear. Men tell tales of curses to explain what they don't understand. A reef tears their hull. A storm swallows their ship. Curse, they say. But I've learned this. Fear itself is the curse. Let it rule you, and the sea will eat ye alive." The words sank deep, though they didn't soothe entirely. Eugene nodded, more to himself than to the captain. Days stretched into weeks. Food grew scarcer, and the crew's tempers flared like sparks. The map's directions grew harder to follow, strange stars, odd bearings, twists that seemed to lead them in circles. Some whispered that the island moved, shifting with the tides to remain hidden. Others swore they saw shapes in the fog, silhouettes of the land that vanished when they blinked. And then one dawn, the lookout cried out again, his voice high, almost disbelieving. "Land! Land ahead!" Eugene's heart leapt as he scrambled up the deck, clutching the rail. There it was, breaking through the mist like a phantom, the faint outline of an island. Dark cliffs jutted skyward, draped in greenery, and waves smashed themselves into foaming spray at its base. The air seemed to hum, low and thrumming, as if the place itself breathed. The hidden island had revealed itself. And in that moment, Eugene felt both wonder and dread coil within him, inseparable and unyielding. The closer they drew to the island, the more unreal it seemed. The fog clung to its cliffs like shrouds, parting only enough to reveal jagged stone and flashes of green canopy. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries echoing against the stone like warnings. The waves crashed harder now, as if the island repelled intruders. Redfin stood at the prow, one foot planted firmly, his cloak snapping in the wind. His gaze did not waver, though the rest of the crew shifted uneasily. Eugene felt his shell tighten as he studied the shoreline. No beach greeted them, no welcoming cove, only sharp rocks and the wild surf. "How do we land on that?" one sailor muttered, shaking his head. Redfin's voice was iron. "There's always a way. Keep your eyes sharp." They skirted the cliffs, searching. Hours passed as the ship circled the island, the waves battering against stone. Then Eugene's keen eyes caught something, a break in the rock, half hidden by a tumble of vines. "Captain," he shouted, pointing. "There, a passage." Redfin's scarred face cracked into a grin. "Good eyes, boy." He barked orders, and the ship angled toward the opening. The crew worked fast, trimming sails, guiding the vessel through narrow waters. The passage was treacherous, lined with submerged rocks. The ship scraped once, tilting dangerously, but with careful maneuvering they pushed through. And then suddenly the sea calmed. The cliffs gave way to a sheltered lagoon, ringed with pale sand and swaying palms. The water shimmered, too still, too bright, as though it hid secrets beneath its glassy surface. The crew exhaled relief, some cheering softly. Eugene, however, could not shake the strangeness. The air was heavy, thick with a sweet scent that clung to the back of his throat. The silence pressed in, broken only by the occasional bird call. Anchors were dropped. Boats were lowered. Redfin was the first to step ashore, his boots sinking into the sand. Eugene followed close behind, his eyes darting from the tree line to the cliffs. Everything about the island seemed heightened, the colors sharper, the sounds clearer. Even the shadows felt alive. The crew spread out, some testing the water, others scanning for fruit or fresh springs. Eugene wandered a little farther up the beach, his claws brushing the sand. He stopped when he noticed something glinting faintly. Bending down, he picked it up, a coin, tarnished but unmistakably gold. Its edges were strange, etched with markings he had never seen. "Captain," Eugene called, holding it up. Redfin strode over, snatching the coin from his claw. His one good eye narrowed as he studied it, then his grin spread wide. "Treasure, lads! She's real!" A cheer rose from the men, though unease lingered in their voices. If a coin lay here, cast aside, what else might the island conceal? The day stretched into uneasy exploration. They pushed past the palms into a dense forest where shafts of sunlight dappled the floor. The air grew warmer, buzzing with insects. Strange flowers bloomed in vivid reds and purples, their petals wide as plates, their scent cloying. Eugene's steps slowed as he noticed something odd. A tree trunk bore carvings, deep, jagged marks that spiraled upward. Not natural, not random. Words, perhaps, or symbols, though time and moss had obscured their meaning. He ran his claw over them, and the bark felt almost warm. "Best not touch that, boy," murmured a sailor at his side, his voice hushed. "Bad signs. Islanders, maybe." But Eugene sensed no tribe here. The island felt empty of people, and yet not empty of presence. By evening, the crew regrouped on the beach. Their haul was modest: fruits, coconuts, some strange shells. No treasure, no hidden chests, though a handful of other coins had been found, scattered like breadcrumbs. Redfin stood among them, holding the map. "If there's gold here, it ain't on the shore. Tomorrow we push deeper." His tone allowed no argument. The men nodded, though their eyes flickered with doubt. The curse's warning still lingered in their minds. That night, campfires flickered along the sand. The crew ate quietly, each man lost in thought. The stars above were unusually dim, swallowed by an unseen haze. The air pressed heavy, and even the crackle of the fire seemed muffled. Eugene lay near the flames, restless. Sleep evaded him, his mind replaying the day's discoveries. His claw closed around the memory of that coin, its weight still imprinted in his palm. Treasure was here. He could feel it. But so was something else. Near midnight, a sound stirred him awake. A soft rustling, as if something moved along the tree line. Eugene sat up, peering into the dark. Shadows shifted just beyond the firelight. His heart hammered. "Who goes there?" he whispered, though no answer came. The rustling grew louder, then stopped. The silence afterward was worse, thick and unnatural. Eugene reached for a driftwood torch, sparking it to life. He stepped cautiously toward the edge of the palms, but when he thrust the torch forward, there was nothing. Only trees swaying, leaves glinting faintly. And then he saw it, etched into the sand at his feet. A spiral drawn hastily, as though by a claw or finger. Fresh. Eugene staggered back, the torch trembling in his grip. He looked toward the camp, but the others still slept, unaware. He turned back to the spiral, but in the moment he blinked, the tide had already begun to wash it away. The island was watching them. Eugene lay awake until dawn, staring at the dark sky, his mind heavy with questions. What was the island hiding? Who or what had drawn that mark? And why did he feel as though the sea itself wanted to keep them from knowing? The hidden island was not just a place. It was a trial. And Eugene sensed their true test had only just begun. Dawn came reluctantly, the first streaks of pale light creeping over the cliffs like hesitant fingers. The crew stirred awake with groans, rubbing salt and sleep from their eyes. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic, like rust or old coins left too long in seawater. Captain Redfin was already awake, pacing the sand with his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze swept the tree line with a hungry sharpness. Eugene, still shaken from the spiral he had seen drawn in the sand, joined him. "Not much sleep, eh, boy?" Redfin muttered, his voice low. Eugene shook his head. "The island? It's strange, Captain. It feels alive." Redfin smirked, though it didn't reach his good eye. "Aye, alive with treasure. Don't let fear twist your gut, lad. Fear's the quickest way to sink a crew." Still, Eugene caught something in his captain's expression, an edge of unease he rarely showed. By mid-morning, the men prepared to march inland. They carried ropes, picks, and sacks, ready to haul whatever gold or relics they might find. Redfin led them through the forest, his map clutched tightly. The deeper they went, the stranger the island became. The trees grew taller, their roots coiling like serpents across the ground. Some trunks twisted unnaturally, their bark dark and knotted. The undergrowth thinned in places, revealing patches of bare soil marked with faint, spiraling grooves. Eugene felt prickles along his shell every time they passed one. Hours passed in tense silence. The forest seemed to resist them. The air grew thick, the ground uneven. Men stumbled, tempers flared. One sailor, a stout fish with a jagged scar on his lip, muttered, "We're wandering in circles. Seen that same crooked tree 3 times. "Quiet," Redfin snapped. He stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Ahead, the forest opened into a wide clearing. In its center stood a monolithic stone, taller than any mast. It was weathered by centuries, its surface etched with deep carvings. Spirals, jagged lines, and crude depictions of figures, humanoids, fish, crabs, all intertwined. The men fell silent, their eyes wide. Eugene stepped closer, tracing one claw along the grooves. The spirals seemed to shimmer faintly in the light, as though they caught the sun differently than the stone around them. "What do you make of it?" Redfin asked, his tone unreadable. Eugene swallowed. "It's a warning, or maybe a story." One of the crew spat on the ground. "I've had enough of ghost stories. Where's the gold?" As if in answer, Redfin pointed to the base of the monolith. Half buried in earth and roots, a cluster of golden coins gleamed. They were scattered, as though spilled from some ancient chest. The men lunged forward, greed overcoming fear. They clawed at the soil, yanking coins free, laughing. But Eugene hesitated. His eyes lingered on the carvings, the spirals that seemed to pulse, the crude figures that twisted around each other in what looked like battle. "Captain," Eugene said quietly, "this feels wrong, like the island doesn't want us to take it." Redfin crouched, scooping up a coin, weighing it in his palm. His grin returned, wide and wild. "Lad, the sea don't hand out gifts to those who wait. We take what we came for, and that's the law of pirates." Still, Eugene's gut twisted as he pocketed a coin. By afternoon, they had filled sacks with treasure. Coins, ornate trinkets, even a dagger encrusted with gems. Their laughter rang through the forest, chasing away the oppressive silence. Yet with every step, Eugene felt the island tighten its grip. Birds had vanished from the trees. The air grew stifling, and shadows deepened even though the sun was high. Then came the first sign. A sailor carrying a heavy sack stumbled, dropping it. The coins spilled across the ground, clinking against each other. He bent to gather them, but as his fingers brushed the last one, the soil beneath shifted. With a sickening crack, the ground gave way. The man let out a strangled cry as he was swallowed into a sudden pit, his body vanishing into darkness. The crew rushed forward, but it was too late. His screams echoed, then cut off abruptly. The men froze, staring into the pit. It was deep, too deep, and no bottom could be seen. The coins he had carried were gone too, swallowed by the earth. "Cursed," whispered one of the crew, his voice shaking. "I told you. This place is cursed." Panic rippled through the group, men clutching their sacks as though afraid the ground itself would steal them away. Redfin's jaw tightened, but his voice remained hard. "We keep moving. One man lost ain't the end. The treasure's real, and so's our prize. Fear'll only make more graves." But even as he spoke, his hand drifted to the hilt of his cutlass, and his eye flicked uneasily to the pit. Eugene felt his claws tremble. The spiral in the sand, the carvings on the stone, the disappearance of birds, it was all connected. The island was watching. The island was warning. And it had just claimed its first sacrifice. The march resumed, though the laughter was gone. Now the men walked stiffly, eyes darting to the ground with every step. The sacks clinked softly, each sound like a taunt. Eugene stayed close to Redfin, whispering, "Captain, we should turn back. We've got enough. Let's not tempt it further." Redfin did not slow. "You don't yet understand, lad. Enough is never enough. If this island holds a fraction of what the map promises, we'll be kings of the sea, and kings don't turn back." Eugene wanted to argue, but the fire in Redfin's eye silenced him. This was more than greed, it was obsession. And Eugene feared it would drag them all into the depths. The forest thickened again, the roots like claws across the path, snagging at boots and ropes. The men moved slower now, fear dampening their greed. Every creak of a branch overhead made them jump. Every rustle in the undergrowth sent hands flying to cutlasses. Captain Redfin pressed on, his jaw tight, his single eye fixed forward as if he alone could see the path. Eugene trailed close, his heart heavy. The sack of coins slung across his shoulder felt less like treasure and more like an anchor, pulling him deeper into dread. At last, they reached another clearing, though smaller than the last. Here the trees grew in a near-perfect circle, their trunks leaning inward like guardians. In the center lay a stone platform, flat and weathered, with markings similar to the great monolith's spirals. But what caught Eugene's eye was the chest. It sat upon the platform as though placed there deliberately, a wooden trunk bound in rusted iron, its surface warped, but intact despite what must have been centuries of weather. Faint golden light seemed to seep from the cracks, shimmering in the dim air. The men gasped, their fear momentarily forgotten. "There it is," one breathed. "That was true," cried another. They surged forward, but Redfin raised his arm sharply. "Hold!" His voice cut through their frenzy like steel. "We don't know what waits here." The men froze, though their eyes burned with hunger. Eugene stepped closer, his claws trembling. The air around the chest felt thicker, heavier. He reached out, hesitated, then pulled back. "Captain, it's not right. No chest lasts this long out here without a reason." Redfin's lips curled into a grin. "Aye. The reason is it was meant to be found by us." And with that he stepped onto the platform. The spirals carved into the stone seemed to shift under his boots, twisting in patterns Eugene swore hadn't been there moments before. The crew held their breath as Redfin crouched, his hand brushing over the iron latch. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, thick, suffocating. Then with a grunt, he wrenched it open. The chest exhaled a sound like a sigh, as though it had been holding its breath for centuries. Inside lay heaps of gold coins, jewels that shimmered with unnatural light, and at the center, wrapped in a faded cloth, a small sealed bottle. The liquid inside glowed faintly like captured starlight. The men roared with triumph, swarming around their captain. They clawed at the chest, stuffing pockets and sacks, their laughter ringing wild and desperate. But Eugene could not look away from the bottle, his gut twisted, his mind screaming at him to stop Redfin before he touched it. The captain's hands closed around the bottle reverently. He held it high, and the faint glow spilled across his face, twisting his grin into something almost manic. "This," Redfin declared, "is no ordinary prize. This be the heart of the island's secret. With this, the seas themselves will bend to me." The crew cheered, though unease flickered in their eyes. Eugene whispered, almost pleading, "Captain, put it back. We've taken enough. The island won't forgive us." Redfin's eyes snapped to him, blazing. Forgive? The sea forgives no one, boy. It takes, and we take back. That's the way. As if to answer, the ground beneath the platform shuddered. The spirals carved into the stone glowed faintly, pulsing like veins. The trees groaned, their branches creaking as though straining inward. The men staggered, panic flashing once more. "It's moving!" one shouted. Another screamed as the soil beneath his feet split open, swallowing him whole in a cascade of roots and darkness. Chaos erupted. The clearing shook, the chest rattled, and coins spilled across the stone like falling rain. The men scrambled, clutching their loot, but more pits yawned open, swallowing treasure and sailors alike. "Run!" Eugene shouted. "Drop it and run!" But greed is heavier than fear. Many clung to their sacks, stumbling under the weight, their cries vanishing as the earth devoured them. Eugene grabbed a sailor by the arm, yanking him toward the trees. "Leave it! Save yourself!" The man hesitated, then let go of his bag. Together they stumbled to the edge of the clearing, roots tearing at their legs. Behind them, Redfin stood defiantly on the platform, the glowing bottle clutched to his chest. His laughter rose above the screams, wild and triumphant. "Mine! All mine!" The spirals beneath him flared with blinding light. The stone cracked. With a thunderous roar, the platform collapsed, swallowing chest, treasure, and Redfin whole. Eugene froze, horror coursing through him. The last he saw of his captain was that manic grin lit by the bottle's glow before the earth sealed shut. Then silence. The clearing stilled, though the spirals still pulsed faintly, as though satisfied. The air lightened slightly, the oppressive weight easing. Those few who survived, no more than 5, Eugene among them, stood trembling, their pockets empty, their hands shaking. The chest was gone. Redfin was gone. Half the crew was gone. The island had taken its price. Eugene stared at the sealed ground where his captain had vanished. His claws clenched, not around gold, but around a single coin he hadn't meant to keep. It was warm in his palm, almost alive. He slipped it quietly into his pocket, heart pounding. "Back to the ship," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Now!" No one argued. They stumbled through the forest, the spirals carved into the soil, watching silently as they passed. The forest no longer resisted, as though the island had what it wanted. When at last they reached the shore, the ship was waiting. The sea shimmered, calm and blue, indifferent to the horrors they had seen. The survivors clambered aboard, too weary to speak. As the sails unfurled and the tide carried them away, Eugene looked back at the island one last time. It loomed in the distance, its cliffs jagged against the sky, its trees swaying like silent sentinels. He knew he would never forget it. The island that whispered warnings, demanded sacrifice, and swallowed his captain whole. And though the chest was gone, the memory of its glow and the faint warmth of the coin in his pocket burned in his mind. The hidden island had not given up all its secrets. Not yet. The sea had a way of washing away sorrow, at least on the surface. Days after leaving the hidden island, the surviving crew of Captain Redfin's ship drifted under skies painted with gold and gray, their faces pale and eyes sunken. The ocean sparkled around them, but its beauty was lost on men who had seen the earth itself devour their captain. For Eugene, the memory clung to him like barnacles on a hull. He still felt the weight of the single coin in his pocket, though he never showed it. At night, when the crew slept restlessly in hammocks, he would draw it out, hold it in the pale moonlight, and watch its surface shimmer with faint markings. They were not like the spirals of the island, but rather symbols too intricate to be mere decoration. The coin whispered possibilities to him, though not in words, only in the tug of an idea not yet formed. He tucked it away carefully, as though keeping a secret not only from the crew, but from the sea itself. The men tried to drown their fear with rum, but Eugene found little comfort in drink. His thoughts turned constantly to the captain's final words, to the glowing bottle, and to the island's punishment. Why had Redfin believed that starlit liquid would make the seas bend to his will? What was it really? The answer would come in whispers of its own, though not from the island, but from an old sailor who sat across from Eugene one night. The man's name was Bartholomew, one of the few who had followed Redfin since before Eugene had joined. His hands were cracked like dried coral, his beard a nest of silver strands. That night, he leaned across the lantern-lit table, his voice hoarse. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Eugene stiffened. "Saw what?" "The bottle. That glow. The way it lit the captain's face like he'd stared into the heart of the ocean." Eugene hesitated before nodding. I saw it." Bartholomew lowered his voice further. "That weren't treasure, lad. That were knowledge, locked in liquid form. You think the island kept it sealed away for coin and jewels? No. That was a recipe. A formula from before our kind built ships." Eugene's heart skipped. "A recipe?" Bartholomew continued. "There's an old tale among sailors, older than any logbook or map. They say the first settlers under the sea didn't live off the scraps of the ocean alone. They were given something greater, a food that gave strength, warmth, and courage in the darkest waters. Some say it was blessed by the tides themselves. Others say it was stolen from a god's feast. Either way, it was no ordinary meal. It was life itself, boiled down to taste." Eugene leaned closer, his claws curling around the table's edge. "And you think that bottle had something to do with it?" Bartholomew's eyes gleamed. "I don't think, lad. I know. Redfin was too blind with greed to see it proper. But you and I, we saw enough. That liquid was a recipe, or the essence of it. Whoever holds it can make more than food. They can make loyalty. They can make sailors forget fear, forget hunger, forget pain. They can make an army follow them into the abyss." Eugene's chest tightened. The idea struck him like a wave crashing against rock. A food that could inspire such devotion. Something more than mere sustenance. Something powerful enough to bind others. Bartholomew leaned back, coughing into his sleeve. "Mark me words, boy. The island may have swallowed the chest and Redfin whole, but it didn't destroy the secret. Not entirely. Pieces of it always survive. Sometimes in symbols, sometimes in whispers, sometimes—" His eyes flicked to Eugene's pocket, sharp as a harpoon. "In trinkets men carry when they shouldn't." Eugene froze, his claw instinctively brushing against the hidden coin. He said nothing, but Bartholomew smirked knowingly. "Keep it safe, lad. One day you'll understand. And when you do, you'll be faced with a choice. Feed yourself or feed the world." The words burrowed deep into Eugene's mind. He lay awake long after Bartholomew staggered off to his hammock, staring at the shadows that rocked with the ship's sway. Feed the world. The weeks passed, and the ship returned at last to bustling ports where sailors forgot sorrow in the noise of taverns and trade. The surviving crews scattered, seeking fresh ships or quiet retirements. Bartholomew himself vanished one misty morning, leaving nothing but an empty hammock swaying like a ghost. But Eugene stayed. He walked the docks, the coin hidden in his claw, his mind consumed by the old sailor's tale. Everywhere he looked, he saw food. Fresh catch hauled in nets, barrels of dried kelp, steaming pots from dockside stalls. But none of it matched the hunger gnawing inside him. None of it was the recipe. So he began his search. He pored over maps, listening for rumors of islands marked by spirals or shores where sailors vanished. He asked old cooks in taverns about dishes said to calm storms or restore broken men. Most laughed him off. Some muttered about cursed recipes, shaking their heads. But once in a while he found a fragment, an herb grown only in deep trenches, a spice traded by nomads who refused to speak its name, a fish said to glow faintly when cooked just right. Each piece felt like a breadcrumb leading back to that glowing bottle, that cursed island. And all the while the coin remained warm in his claw, as though urging him on. Years slipped by like tides retreating from the shore. The boy who had once stood trembling before Captain Redfin's fiery eyes was gone. In his place stood a young man hardened by salt and wind, his shell tougher, his claws sharper. Yet beneath that hardened exterior, Eugene still carried the same restless hunger, a hunger that no treasure chest, no pile of gold, and no fleeting victory could quiet. He worked ship after ship, sometimes as a deckhand, sometimes as a cook's helper, sometimes even as a petty officer when luck or circumstance allowed, but always in every galley he entered, he kept his eyes on the pots and pans, the spices, the way food moved men's spirits. He began to notice things others didn't. A stew, if thick and hearty enough, could make exhausted sailors laugh again. A dish with the right herbs could calm seasick bellies better than medicine. Food, he realized, was more than sustenance. It was a force, invisible but binding. A captain's speech could rally men for an hour, but a good meal could bind them for a lifetime. Eugene experimented when he could, though opportunities were rare. He mixed odd spices together, roasted fish in new ways, added kelp flakes or ground coral powder when the cook wasn't watching. Most attempts were failures, too bitter, too slimy, too bland. But sometimes, just sometimes, a dish would strike a chord. The crew would fall silent as they chewed, then nod and smile, their shoulders relaxing, their voices softening as though the world felt just a little brighter. Those moments stayed with him. They were the sparks he chased. But sparks weren't enough. He wanted the flame. He wanted the recipe. One evening, while docked at a ragged little port on the edge of the Coral Sea, Eugene stumbled upon a tavern unlike any he'd seen. Its windows glowed a dim orange. Its walls sagged as though leaning tiredly on one another. Inside, the air was thick with smoke. But the smell, the smell, nearly knocked him off his claws. It wasn't just fish frying or bread baking. It was something richer, something layered. He pushed through the crowd, following the scent, to a pot simmering on the fire. An old cook, round as a barrel and humming tunelessly, stirred it slowly. "What's in it?" Eugene asked, unable to hide the hunger in his voice. The old cook glanced at him, his eyes small and watery. "Nothing you'd know, boy. Just sea moss broth with a secret touch." Eugene leaned closer. "What touch?" The cook chuckled. "If I told you, it wouldn't be a secret." But Eugene wasn't one to let go. He offered to help in the kitchen, washing dishes and carrying barrels just to stay near that pot. And when the cook wasn't looking, he watched closely. Watched the pinch of dried seaweed, the splash of clam brine, the sprinkling of something golden that glimmered like sunlight trapped in powder. That night, as he tasted the broth, Eugene felt it again. The spark. It wasn't the recipe, but it was a piece, a fragment, the way the coin was a fragment. The cook caught him savoring the flavor, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, lad. You got the look of one who chases shadows. Don't lose yourself to what you can't ever find." But Eugene only smiled faintly. Maybe shadows are where the treasure hides. The cook laughed, a low, weary sound, and turned back to his pot. Eugene left the tavern that night with a small pouch of the golden powder tucked away, a payment the cook never realized he'd given. It wasn't theft in Eugene's mind. It was inheritance. Knowledge wanted to be passed on, and he was willing to carry it. From then on, his search grew more focused. He sought out cooks, healers, spice traders, wandering storytellers, anyone who spoke of food that did more than fill bellies. He gathered scraps of recipes like a sailor gathers driftwood, storing them in a small journal he bound with twine. Some pages smelled of salt, some of smoke, some of herbs so sharp they stung the nose. And still the coin traveled with him, warming at times as if approving his progress, cooling when he strayed from the path. One stormy night, while the ship he served on pitched against black waves, Eugene pulled the coin out and studied it by lantern light. He traced the strange markings again and again, his claw trembling. They seemed less like symbols now and more like instructions, not words exactly, but steps, ingredients, measurements, hidden in shape and line. Could it be? Was the recipe written not in ink or spoken in tale, but carved into this very coin? The ship groaned under the storm's fury, but Eugene hardly noticed. His heart pounded. He pressed the coin to his chest, the metal cold against his shell, and whispered into the roaring night, "I'll find it. I swear on the sea herself, I'll find it." And the storm, as though listening, seemed to ease its rage, if only for a moment. The idea that the coin itself might hold the secret consumed Eugene. He studied it by lantern light, by moonlight, by the flickering glow of campfires on deserted shores. Every curve and etching seemed to whisper something just beyond his understanding. He traced the spirals, followed the ridges, and compared them to the recipes he'd collected. Patterns began to appear. The swirl carved in the center reminded him of kelp fronds, the way they curled and layered when cut fine. The jagged line across the bottom, was it a measure of salt or a symbol for heat? Each time he thought he grasped the meaning, it slipped away like sand through his claws. But he kept at it. Obsession was in his nature, and this was no different. Where another sailor might have chased coin or conquest, Eugene chased flavor. His journal grew thicker with notes and sketches. On one page, he drew the coin's markings exactly as they appeared. On the next, he jotted down possible ingredients: dried seaweed, barnacle flakes, seagrass oil. On another, he mapped connections between symbols and spices, arrows crisscrossing until the page looked like a net woven too tightly to untangle. Yet he pressed on, because somewhere deep in his shell, Eugene felt the certainty that this recipe, whatever it was, would not only change his fate, it would define it. One evening, while the ship lay anchored near a forgotten reef, Eugene sought the quiet of the galley. Most of the crew were above deck, laughing, drinking, telling stories under the stars. But Eugene preferred solitude. He lit a single lantern, laid the coin on the table, and spread his notes around it. "Salt," he muttered, his claws tapping the wood. "Always salt. Every cook uses it. But this symbol, it must mean something more. Balance, maybe. Not too much, not too little." He picked up a jar of sea salt and let the crystals fall slowly through his claw, their sparkle catching the lantern light. Then he leaned closer to the coin again. And this swirl, kelp, finely chopped, simmered just so, gives a broth its body, holds the flavors together. He began to sketch a rough recipe, though many pieces were still missing. A protein source, something hearty, a binder, something that held it all, spices to elevate it, a sauce, perhaps, to seal it. The more he wrote, the more the dish took shape in his mind, not just a stew, not just a broth, something handheld, compact, layered. A meal that could be eaten quickly on a ship, or savored slowly by a fire. Something simple, yet powerful enough to linger in memory. He didn't know it yet, but the seed of the Krabby Patty was beginning to sprout. That night, the galley smelled faintly of char and brine as he experimented. He mashed boiled clams with kelp paste, fried them into patties, and tucked them between flat rounds of toasted sea bread. He sprinkled the stolen golden powder over top, letting it melt into the surface. The first bite was decent. Salty, chewy, filling, but not yet right, not the dish. Frustrated, he slammed his claw down, rattling the jars and pans. Too plain, too empty. There's something missing, but what? He stared at the coin again, the lantern's flame flickering across its surface. For a heartbeat, the marking seemed alive, glowing faintly. And then, in his mind, he heard a voice. Not quite a voice, more a suggestion. Harmony. It wasn't just about ingredients. It was about balance. A perfect dish wasn't heavy in one flavor or weak in another. It was a blend, every part singing together like a crew hauling ropes in unison. Eugene's eyes widened. He scribbled furiously in his journal. The secret is not in one thing, it's in everything together. But knowing that and achieving it were two different battles. Days passed. Weeks. Each time he cooked, he came closer but fell short. Some patties were too tough, others too bland. Some sauces overwhelmed the meat, while others left it lifeless. His fellow sailors laughed at his endless experiments. "Krabs, you'll starve us all if we let you cook," they jeered. But sometimes, after tasting one of his failures, their laughter would pause just for a moment. A flicker of surprise crossed their faces. Even wrong, his food carried something promising. Still, Eugene wasn't satisfied. The spark was there, but not the flame. One morning, after yet another sleepless night, bent over his journal, he trudged above deck. The sun was breaking over the horizon, painting the water in streaks of gold. The sight hit him differently this time. Golden light, warmth, life. His thoughts snapped to the golden powder he'd stolen from the old tavern cook years before. He still had a pinch left, tucked away in a pouch. It was rare, precious, almost spent. But maybe it was the missing piece. Back in the galley, he ground clam, kelp, and sea bread together once more, shaping them into patties. He fried them carefully, his claw steady. Then, with a reverence usually reserved for treasure, he sprinkled the last of the golden powder into a sauce made of brine, kelp oil, and crushed coral herbs. When he poured it over the patties, the aroma that rose nearly dropped him to his knees. It was warm and sharp, rich yet light, as though the ocean itself had given up a secret long buried. He took a bite. For the first time, Eugene didn't critique. He didn't frown or scribble notes. He simply closed his eyes, a tear prickling at the corner of his eye. Because this was close. Closer than ever. Not perfect, no, but enough to taste destiny on his tongue. He whispered to himself, his voice breaking. This is it. Or nearly it. I can feel it. And though he still had miles of searching left, he knew the path now. He would chase it across oceans, through storms, through years if he had to. Because the origin of the recipe wasn't in the coin, or the powder, or even the ingredients. It was in him. The pirate who became a cook. The cook who became a dreamer. And Eugene Krabs was nothing if not stubborn enough to see a dream through. The days that followed were unlike any Eugene had known. He felt as though he carried a lantern inside his shell, one that refused to go out. Every meal became an experiment, every scrap of ingredient a chance to test, refine, and edge closer to perfection. The crew grew used to the smell of frying kelp oil, to the sizzling of patties on the pan, to the clatter of pans echoing through the ship's wooden belly. Sometimes they groaned, sometimes they teased, but more often than not they wandered down to the galley to just try a bite. And though they never said it outright, Eugene caught the glances they exchanged after chewing, those quick, silent acknowledgments that maybe, just maybe, the crazy cook was onto something. But still, he knew the truth. It wasn't finished. Each attempt brushed against greatness but stopped short. The balance was delicate, elusive, always slipping through his claws at the last moment. He began to dream of flavors. In his sleep, the coin's symbols swirled like waves. He saw a circle of bread enclosing a patty, a secret sauce binding it all, and herbs dancing like notes in a song. Each dream carried him closer to the final answer, yet withheld the last piece, as if daring him to persist. One stormy evening, when thunder cracked like cannon fire above the ship, Eugene sat alone in the galley, staring at the nearly empty pouch of golden powder. He had used it sparingly, stretching it across test after test, but now only dust remained. One last chance, one final gamble. He closed his eyes and thought of his past, the boy raised in poverty, clutching coins as though they were life itself, the pirate chasing treasure, fighting storms and carving his name across the seas, and now the cook, hunched over a pan, chasing a recipe that seemed as untouchable as the horizon. He whispered into the storm, "If I can't do it now, I'll never do it at all." Slowly he worked. He ground the freshest kelp he had, slicing it as fine as silk. He shaped the meat with care, pressing it firm but not heavy, letting it breathe. He toasted the bread lightly, enough to crisp but not to burn, and at last he mixed the final dusting of golden powder into a sauce, stirring until it gleamed like sunlight trapped in a bottle. When he layered it all together, the galley seemed to hold its breath. The storm's roar faded, as if even the sea waited to see what would happen. Eugene lifted the creation in his claws. It was warm, fragrant, balanced. He took a bite. The world stilled. It was there. Every note, every flavor, every dream that had haunted him. The salt sang with the sweetness. The crunch balanced the tenderness. The sauce tied it all in harmony. It was more than food. It was memory, comfort, adventure, and treasure all in one. His claws trembled as he chewed, and when he swallowed, he laughed, a low, astonished laugh, as though that grew into something joyous. By Neptune, I've done it. Tears welled in his eyes, though he would never admit it. He had found it. The dish that would carry his name, his legacy, his future. The origin, the Krabby Patty. Of course, perfection brings with it a burden. He knew at once this recipe was too precious to share freely. If the crew learned it, they'd spread it from tavern to tavern until it was nothing more than another sailor's snack. If rivals caught wind, they'd twist it, claim it, sell it for their own gain. No, this was his secret, his treasure. Eugene cleaned the galley, tucked his notes deep into a locked chest, and etched the final recipe into the back of the coin itself, hidden among the old markings so none but he could decipher it. Then he hid the coin away, close to his heart, where even the sea couldn't take it from him. From that night on, the crew noticed a change in him. He still cooked, still experimented, but with a confidence that hadn't been there before. When he served them food, it was better than ever, but he never gave them the dish again. That one he kept for himself. Rumors spread among the sailors of other ships that Krabs had uncovered something extraordinary, a flavor beyond description. Some claimed he'd struck a bargain with sea witches. Others swore he'd found Atlantis' kitchens. Still others muttered about cursed gold turned to spice. Krabs never corrected them. Let the stories grow. Let the myth build. The truth was his alone. But at night, when the ship rocked gently and the ocean hummed its eternal song, Eugene would sit by his lantern, the taste of his creation still lingering in memory, and whisper, "This is me, treasure. Not gold, not jewels. This." And so beneath storm clouds and starlight, on decks drenched with salt and spray, the legend of the Krabby Patty was born, not yet shared with the world, not yet served in a bustling little restaurant, but alive all the same, hidden in the heart of a pirate who had discovered that the greatest treasures were not always buried in sand or locked in chests. They could be cooked, savored, and remembered forever. And Eugene Krabs vowed that one day, when the time was right, he would bring this treasure ashore. The sea has a way of whispering to those who live upon it too long. Sometimes it speaks in the rush of waves against the hull, other times in the eerie creak of ropes swaying in the night. For Eugene Krabs, the ocean was both a home and a haunting. By the time he had created the recipe that would one day make him famous, he had also gathered a lifetime of stories, tales soaked in salt water, heavy with lessons, and carried like anchors in his heart. They were not the glorious victories sung by sailors in taverns. They were not the kind of tales that made men cheer or boast. No, these were tired tales, heavy, worn, and whispered at the end of long nights when the crew had fallen asleep, and only the sea kept him company. One such memory returned to him on a quiet evening. The ship drifted lazily, sails slack against a gentle breeze. The crew lounged on deck, some mending nets, others dozing with hats pulled low. Eugene sat apart, staring at the horizon, the coin with its secret tucked beneath his shell. He thought back to the early years of his pirate life, when he believed treasure was endless and the sea would always provide. He remembered a night when they had pursued a rumor of riches buried on a reef near Sharktooth Shoals. The maps had seemed clear, the stars above had guided them true, and spirits on board had been high. But as they neared the shoals, the sea betrayed them. Rocks jutted like jagged teeth beneath the waves, tearing the belly of their ship. In the chaos, Eugene had manned the pumps, claw blistered and bleeding, while others scrambled to save what they could. They survived, but the treasure was never found. The memory of that wreck clung to him like seaweed. He could still hear the screams of sailors swallowed by the tide, still feel the helplessness of watching gold slip away into the deep. That was the night he realized the ocean gave nothing without cost. He sighed softly at the memory. Around him, the younger crewmen laughed, telling crude jokes, their hearts still light with the belief that fortune was always just beyond the next wave. Krabs envied that innocence, but he knew better. The sea always asked for its due. Another tale returned, the story of the drifting ship. It had been a foggy dawn years earlier when their vessel stumbled upon a derelict schooner floating without sails, crew, or even gulls overhead. The ship was intact, but eerily silent. Curiosity had driven them aboard, boots echoing hollowly across the deck. The cabins were untouched, meals still half-eaten, hammocks swaying as though men had only just left them. Yet no souls remained. Not one. The crew whispered of curses of ghostly hands pulling men below. Eugene himself had wandered into the galley of that vessel, seeing bowls of soup still warm, spoons abandoned mid-stir. A chill had sunk into him deeper than any storm spray. They left quickly, abandoning the ghost ship to drift on. But Krabs carried that vision forever. the sense that the sea could erase life in an instant, leaving nothing behind but silence. He rubbed his claws together as the memory faded. The crew around him had their own tales, no doubt, but none carried the same weight. He had seen things they would never understand until age and the waves stripped away their bravado. As twilight deepened, Eugene began to hum a tune under his breath, a sailor's lullaby, slow and sorrowful. One by one, the crew drifted off to sleep, lulled by the rocking of the ship. Krabs remained awake, staring out at the horizon, letting the tired tales resurface. He thought of a storm they had faced near the Devil's Trench, where lightning cracked so close the sea itself seemed to burn. For 3 days they battled wind and water, fighting to keep the ship afloat. Men were swept overboard, their cries lost to the howling gale. When the storm passed, the survivors were gaunt, their eyes hollow. They had survived, yes, but they left pieces of themselves in that storm, fragments that would never return. Krabs carried those pieces, too. They clung to him as surely as barnacles on the hull. The ocean was a cruel keeper of stories. It did not sing of triumph, only of weariness. And so when Eugene thought of his past, it was not with glory, but with exhaustion. He had lived many lives upon the sea, boy, pirate, cook, dreamer. Each tale added weight to his shell until he felt more ancient than the tides themselves. As the stars glittered overhead, Krabs lay back on the deck, folding his claws beneath his head. The ship rocked gently, the sound of the waves a lullaby he both loved and feared. And softly, to himself, he whispered the truth no sailor ever wanted to admit. The sea doesn't remember us, but we remember it. It was in that remembering that the tired tales of Eugene Krabs lived on, etched not in maps or songs, but in the weary heart of a crab who had given his youth to the ocean and received both treasure and torment in return. The night deepened, wrapping the ship in a blanket of stillness. The stars, scattered like spilled coins across the heavens, shimmered faintly on the water's surface. Eugene Krabs remained on deck, though the rest of the crew had long since given themselves to slumber. It was in these quiet hours, when even the sea seemed to hush its endless song, that the tired tales pressed hardest upon him. Another memory stirred, unbidden. He recalled a voyage toward the barren cliffs of the outer deep, where whispers spoke of caves stuffed with pearls. They had sailed weeks on little more than stale bread and rainwater, chasing that promise. When they arrived, the caves were real, but so too were the creatures guarding them. Massive sea urchins clung to the rocks, their spines sharp as spears. The crew tried to pry the pearls loose, only to be driven back again and again by the creatures' relentless defense. One man lost his leg to a venomous puncture, and another never returned at all, pulled beneath the waves in a sudden flurry of bubbles. In the end, the pearls remained where they lay, untouched, mocking the pirates with a pale gleam. Krabs remembered standing at the cliff's edge, staring at the ocean, knowing the sea had once again taken more than it gave. The memory carried him back to the deck, where his eyes fell upon the young deckhand, Finn, curled up in sleep near a coil of rope. Finn was barely more than a boy, his face still soft, his dreams likely filled with golden treasure and endless adventure. Eugene envied him, but also pitied him. That same boyish face would one day be carved by salt, worry, and regret. Krabs leaned back and let the thought tumble out in a whisper. You think the sea's your friend, lad, but it's a trickster. It is. It lets you dream so it can laugh when it takes those dreams away. The boy stirred slightly in his sleep, but did not wake. Shaking his head, Eugene pushed himself upright and wandered toward the railing. The sea stretched out in every direction, endless and eternal. He thought of another tale, the story of the drifting barrel. It had happened years ago during a crossing of the midnight trench. Supplies had run thin, and the crew was on the edge of mutiny. Then, as though fortune had heard their pleas, a barrel floated into view. The men hauled it aboard with trembling claws and fins, desperate for whatever it held. When they pried it open, they found salted fish, perfectly preserved, as though waiting for them. The crew feasted, laughter ringing out for the first time in days. But that night 3 men fell ill. By dawn, 2 were dead, and the third raved with fever before slipping into silence. The barrel had been a gift, yes, but a poisoned one. Krabs could never forget the look of those men in their final moments, faces pale, lips blue. From then on, he never trusted what the sea offered freely. He preferred to earn his food with sweat and skill, not rely on what drifted to him. The gentle creak of wood under his feet reminded him of one more story, the kind that only grew heavier with time. It was the tale of the lost comrade. Years ago, when Eugene was still young and reckless, he had sailed alongside a crab named Redfin. The two were inseparable, bound by both rivalry and brotherhood. Redfin had a laugh that carried across the waves, and a daring streak that made him leap into danger without hesitation. Together, they had stolen treasure, outrun Navy ships, and sung shanties until their throats were raw. But one night, during a raid on a merchant galleon, Redfin had gone too far. He charged ahead of the others, claws swinging, eyes blazing. By the time Eugene caught up, Redfin was gone, swallowed by the dark waters, never to surface again. No body, no goodbye, just the empty sea. Krabs had carried that loss ever since. He had learned then that the sea did not return what it claimed. It kept its secrets locked away beneath the waves, far from any sailor's grasp. He exhaled heavily, leaning against the railing, his gaze fixed on the constellations above. The stars seemed eternal, but even they would fade with time. Behind him, the crew began to stir. One by one, men rose to relieve each other at the watch, their footsteps heavy with sleep. A few noticed Krabs standing alone, but none spoke. They knew in their own way that the old crab was haunted by stories too heavy for the rest of them to carry. As the night shifted toward dawn, the tired tales pressed down harder, leaving Eugene with a single thought that clung to him like the sea's spray. Every coin he had gathered, every map he had followed, every storm he had endured, it had all come at a price, a toll of blood, loss, and memory. And though he would one day be known as a merchant, a cook, and a miser who clung to his coins, in that moment, under the endless stars, Eugene Krabs was only what the sea had made him, tired, scarred, and unforgettably bound to the ocean's cruel embrace. The first hints of dawn brushed the horizon, painting the ocean in pale streaks of silver and rose. But Eugene Krabs did not find comfort in the sight. For him, the rising sun often brought memories just as heavy as those of the night. One such memory came back to him now, the tale of the drifting lantern. It had been years earlier, on a night thick with fog. The sea was calm, eerily so, with no waves breaking against the hull. The crew whispered nervously, for silence on the ocean never felt natural. Then, out of the mist, a faint glow appeared, a single lantern, bobbing on the water's surface. They thought it belonged to another ship, perhaps a vessel lost in the fog. Eager to find company or trade, they rowed toward it. But when they reached the light, they found no ship, no rope, no wood, only the lantern, burning brightly in its glass case, floating alone on the endless water. They hauled it aboard, and though it gave warmth and glow, none could explain how the flame remained lit. That night, one by one, crewmen began to dream of voices, soft, sorrowful, calling from beneath the sea. Some awoke screaming, others whispering promises they could not remember. By morning, the lantern had gone out on its own, and when they searched for it, they found it vanished from the ship entirely. Krabs still shivered at the thought. The sea don't just hide treasure, he murmured to himself. It hides secrets best left in the dark. As the sun rose higher, another memory surfaced, gentler this time. It was of the day the sea gave them music. The crew had been stranded in the doldrums for a week, the sails limp, the air unmoving. Morale was low, and every man grew restless. Then one evening, as the sky turned violet, the waters around them began to hum, faint at first, then stronger. The sound was not of wind nor wail, but a melody, a deep, soothing tone that seemed to rise from the depths themselves. The entire crew gathered along the rail, listening in awe as the sea sang to them. Krabs remembered closing his eyes, letting that sound seep into his bones. For once there was no hunger, no fear, no longing, only calm. By morning the winds returned, filling their sails, and the ship moved again. None of them ever heard that music again, but Eugene carried it in his heart, a rare gift from an otherwise merciless ocean. That was the way of the sea, he thought. Cruel one day, kind the next, but never predictable. Shifting his weight against the rail, Krabs rubbed his tired eyes. He knew he had more tales locked away inside him, the kind he never told anyone, not even his closest mates. Like the story of the Golden Compass. That compass had been given to him by an old hermit crab who lived on a lonely stretch of reef. The hermit had claimed it could point not north, but to one's greatest desire. Skeptical though he was, Eugene had kept it close, and one night, when the crew quarreled over which course to take, he pulled it out. The needle spun wildly before settling, not toward land, nor treasure, but toward the deepest trench they had ever seen. Against his better judgment, Krabs followed it. At the bottom of that trench, they discovered an ancient wreck, half buried in silt. Inside were crates of silverware, jewels, and finely carved coral ornaments. For a time, the crew rejoiced, convinced the compass was true. But when they returned to the surface, the compass needle broke, frozen forever. And one by one, every jewel they carried began to crumble, dissolving into salt before their eyes. By the time they reached port, they had nothing left but the empty compass case. Krabs had thrown it into the waves, never trusting such tricks again. The sea knows what you want, and it knows how to take it from you too, he muttered. Behind him, the deck stirred as the cook prepared a meager breakfast of dried kelp and biscuits. The smell carried across the ship, mingling with the salt air. Eugene watched the crew gather, their tired faces softened by the simple comfort of food. He envied their youth, their belief that the sea still owed them fortune. He, however, knew the truth. The sea owed nothing. And yet he remained. For all its cruelty, its endless taking, there was something about the ocean that bound him to it. Perhaps it was the freedom, the horizon always stretching further, promising something new just beyond reach. Or perhaps it was the silence between storms when the world seemed to belong to him alone. Krabs sighed and let the memories fade. He knew more tales would come to him whether he wanted them or not. That was the burden of a sailor who had lived too long and seen too much. The ocean carried his past as surely as it carried his ship, and though the crew saw only a hardened captain, within him lived every storm, every loss, and every fleeting joy. The tide shifted, and the ship creaked as it adjusted to the swell. Eugene straightened his back, his claws tightening on the railing. "Another day," he whispered. another tale waiting to be written. But in his heart he knew the sea had already written plenty, and it wasn't finished yet. The morning rolled gently into day, but Eugene Krabs still felt as though the night clung to his shell. He leaned against the worn wood of the ship, listening to the groan of the timbers and the sigh of the waves. The sea had given him endless stories, and yet every tale left behind its own shadow. But not all shadows were heavy. Some were soft, like the fading light of lanterns after a long watch, or the hush that followed a storm when the sea finally settled, gentle as a mother's lullaby. Those softer shadows were the ones he thought of now as the wind carried the smell of brine and kelp. One memory rose above the rest. A quiet night under the stars when the sea had rocked the ship like a cradle. The crew had been weary, too tired to sing, too hungry to quarrel. They had simply lain on the deck, staring at the sky above. Eugene remembered that silence well. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the creak of the ropes, the distant splash of fish leaping, the slow breath of the waves against the hull. For a moment, it felt as though the sea itself had joined them in their rest, humming softly with its endless motion. Krabs closed his eyes and let that feeling wash over him again. The sea, for all its dangers, had always known how to soothe those who listened. He thought of the drifting lantern, the singing waters, the compass that led them astray. He thought of storms survived, of winds that howled and waves that clawed at their sails, only to leave behind a morning of glassy calm. He thought of laughter around a fire on a sandy shore, when for once the crew felt like family rather than shipmates. Each tale, each memory carried weight, but within that weight was rest, the kind of rest that came only after struggle. As the day waned and shadows stretched long across the deck, Eugene spoke softly to himself, his voice barely louder than the waves. Strange how the sea gives us everything and nothing all at once. She's cruel, aye, but she knows how to whisper a man to sleep when his bones grow weary. The words were not for anyone to hear. They were confessions to the water, offerings to the tide. That night, the sea granted him another gift. The wind calmed, the air grew cool, and the stars returned in their thousands. The ocean mirrored them perfectly, so it seemed as though the ship floated not on water, but between two skies, one above, one below. The crew muttered in awe, their voices hushed, as if afraid to break the spell. Krabs sat alone near the bow, his eyes heavy, his heart strangely light. He watched as the stars shimmered, as though winking at him with secrets he could never uncover. For a long while he simply breathed, letting the rhythm of the sea rock him. In those moments, he felt like a boy again, small and eager, dreaming of treasure and grand adventures. The weight of command, the scars of storms, the bitterness of loss, all of it seemed to loosen its grip. He was left only with the sound of the waves, the cool salt air, and the lullaby of the sea. Perhaps that was the true gift the ocean gave its sailors. Not gold, not riches, not even stories of triumph, but rest. Rest earned through hardship. Rest given freely when it was most needed. Eugene let his eyes fall shut. The hum of the tide rose and fell, gentle as breathing. He could almost hear voices in the distance, not threatening this time, not sorrowful, but calm and steady. They spoke in tones like waves against sand, telling him it was all right to let go of the day, to surrender to the night. The crew settled down around him, hammocks swaying, whispers fading. Soon only the ocean spoke. Its endless rhythm, steady and deep, wove itself into every ear, every heart. Even the restless found peace beneath its lullaby. Krabs curled his claw against the wood, feeling the warmth that had gathered from the sun. His last thought before sleep claimed him was not of treasure, nor fear, nor the unknown. It was of stillness, the rare, precious stillness the sea sometimes shared, as though rewarding its weary sailors with a kindness few ever spoke of. The stars wheeled above, the tide breathed below, the ship swayed like a cradle between the two. And there, surrounded by memories of storms and songs, of lanterns and lullabies, Mr. Krabs drifted into dreams, held by the sea, rocked by its tired tales, as if the ocean itself wished him good night. The sea had a way of marking time, not in calendars or clocks, but in tides and journeys. For Eugene Krabs, the measure of his years was written in the salt upon his shell, the scars carved across his claws, and the dreams that still pulled him back to restless nights. He had lived through storms and shadows, through hunger and hope. But now, as the sun rose in a pale wash of gold over the horizon, the ship that carried him finally turned its bow toward home. Home. The word tasted strange after so long adrift. For years, Krabs had been nothing but a sailor, a pirate, a wanderer with the sea for his bed and the stars for his ceiling. To think of land, of streets, of shops, of familiar voices, was like recalling a half-forgotten tune. Yet the thought stirred something within him, a warmth he had nearly forgotten. The crew, too, seemed quieter than usual. Their laughter, once loud and rowdy, had softened into murmurs. They knew, as he did, that their adventures were reaching an end. The treasure they had found, the kind not measured in gold, but in stories, scars, and secret maps, was behind them now. Ahead lay the lives they had left behind, the families who might remember them, or the towns that might have forgotten them. Krabs stood at the bow, his claws folded behind his back. The wind carried a smell that was not entirely of the sea. There was a hint of sand, of land plants baking in the sun, of something solid and real. His heart tightened at the thought. He remembered leaving that same shore as a younger crab, restless and eager. He had left with a ship barely fit for the waves, a pocket full of dreams and a hunger for riches. Now he returned older, wearier, carrying something far more precious than the gold he once chased. Knowledge. Knowledge of the sea's whispers, of islands that hid in mists, of storms that broke men and rebuilt them. Knowledge of recipes guarded in stone, of secrets that smelled of sizzling grills and tasted of home. For in all his voyages, it was not jewels or coins that clung most firmly to his memory. It was the recipe. The strange, ancient mixture hidden away on that island, discovered beneath shadows and stone. A recipe that spoke of more than food. It spoke of legacy, of survival, of joy in the simplest bite. He had carried it with him, not just on scraps of parchment tucked into his chest, but in the very marrow of his shell. He had not yet shared it, not with crew nor kin. Some secrets, he knew, could be stolen if spoken too freely. Others, however, grew stronger the longer they were kept close, waiting for the right time to bloom. This one would be his anchor, his compass, his treasure greater than gold. As the ship neared land, the crew stirred with anticipation. Old songs rose on their lips, though softer, tinged with fatigue. Krabs let them sing, but his eyes stayed fixed on the shoreline that grew sharper with every passing wave. The cliffs stood tall and familiar, the beaches stretched wide and welcoming, and beyond them lay the winding paths back to the life he had once known. And yet he knew he would never truly be the same. The sea had taken too much from him to leave him untouched. His dreams would always carry its sound. His claws would always itch for the sway of a deck. Even in the stillest of nights on land, he would hear the tide whispering his name. But he also knew he had something new to build, something steadier than sails and sturdier than ships. The formula was waiting to be brought to life, not in secret caves or storm-tossed ships, but in a kitchen filled with warmth. It was a seed planted deep in his heart, ready to grow roots in the soil of home. As the ship creaked closer to the docks, Krabs' claws tightened on the railing. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the salt air one last time before the land claimed him. His mind drifted back to the whispers of the sea, to the tired tales that had rocked him to sleep, to the island that had hidden its treasure not in gold, but in flavor. Home awaited, and with it, a future no sailor could have imagined. The ship's hull groaned as it eased into the harbor, its sails slackening, its ropes thrown down to eager dock hands. The crew leaned over the railing, gazes drinking in the sight of land as though they had forgotten its shape. Some shouted with relief, others laughed, but most simply stared in silence. The sea had given them years, and now, at last, it was returning them to the world they had left behind. Krabs remained still, his heavy boots planted firmly on the deck. He had imagined this moment countless times during lonely nights on the water, yet when it came, it did not thunder with triumph or blaze with the golden glow of treasure. Instead, it washed over him gently, like a tide at dusk, quiet, inevitable, bittersweet. One by one, the crew disembarked, each carrying their stories with them. Some clutched small chests of coins, others only bundles of clothing, but all bore the marks of sailors, weathered skin, calloused claws, and eyes that flickered with the restless pull of the sea. They melted into the town, scattering like leaves in the wind, their brotherhood dissolving as quickly as it had formed. Such was the way of sailors. Krabs lingered until the deck was nearly empty. His claws brushed against the railing, tracing the grooves worn smooth by countless voyages. How many nights had he leaned there, staring at a horizon that never ended? How many storms had battered this very wood? How many victories had been won upon its planks? The ship had been his home, his shield, his prison, and his freedom. Leaving it behind felt like cutting off a piece of himself. But even the strongest sailor could not live forever at sea. At last, with a deep breath, Krabs descended the gangplank. The dock's wooden boards felt strange beneath his boots, steady, unmoving, almost unnerving after so many years of shifting decks. The harbor bustled with life, fishermen unloading nets heavy with the morning's catch, merchants shouting prices, children chasing each other between crates. The ordinary rhythm of land life throbbed all around him, so different from the wild heartbeat of the sea. Krabs stood in the midst of it, his massive frame and weathered shell drawing a few curious stares. To the townsfolk, he looked like a relic of some forgotten adventure, a reminder of stories they only half believed. He didn't mind. Let them look. They would never know the storms he had weathered, the monsters he had faced, the islands that had whispered their secrets into his claws. His steps carried him through the streets, and with each one he felt the weight of his years at sea pressing heavier upon him. Buildings he once knew stood taller or shorter than he remembered. Streets twisted in ways that seemed unfamiliar. He was a stranger in the place he had once called home, yet strangely that suited him. He had returned not to pick up where he had left off, but to begin anew. The secret he carried burned in his mind. The recipe. The strange, wondrous recipe that had been etched in stone and guarded by riddles. He could still smell it, taste it, hear the sizzling whispers of its promise. It was unlike anything the sea had ever offered him. Not fleeting treasure, not dangerous glory, but something enduring, something that could be built, shared, savored. For the first time in years, Krabs thought of roots instead of sails, of steady walls instead of shifting waves. Perhaps his days of treasure hunting were over, but something greater lay ahead, a chance to turn his discovery into more than a secret, to transform it into a legacy. That night, he found a quiet tavern on the edge of town. The lamps inside burned low, casting the wooden walls in a soft amber glow. The patrons were few, mostly weary workers nursing mugs of kelp ale. Krabs chose a corner table and sat heavily, his claws folded before him. The innkeeper, a stout anglerfish with tired eyes, brought him a plate of stew and bread. "Long night?" the innkeeper asked, glancing at the sailor's weathered shell. "Long life," Krabs muttered, with a small chuckle. He paid with a few coins, then ate in silence. Yet even as the stew filled his belly, he found himself longing for something else, something he had carried within him ever since that island. It was there in the dim glow of that tavern that the first spark of an idea took root. He pictured a place not unlike this one, but brighter, warmer, a place where sailors and townsfolk alike could gather, not to drown their sorrows, but to share in something simple and joyful. A place where the recipe could come alive, not as a secret locked away, but as a treasure shared with every bite. The thought made him smile, a rare, genuine smile that softened his weathered face. Perhaps his days of chasing treasure were done. Perhaps the greatest treasure had been waiting all along, not at the bottom of the sea, but in the simple pleasure of good food and full hearts. As the tavern quieted into night, Krabs leaned back in his chair, his mind already building plans, shaping dreams. The sea had given him many things, adventures, scars, memories, but this secret, this recipe, would give him a future. The morning sun crept over the harbor, painting the sky with soft streaks of gold and coral. Krabs rose early, as he always did at sea, though the steady ground beneath him felt strange compared to the rocking of a deck. He stepped outside the tavern, the cool air sharp with the smell of salt and seaweed, and for a long moment he simply stood, watching the gulls wheel overhead. He had returned. That truth sank into him with a heaviness that was equal parts comfort and sorrow. The sea had let him go, at least for now, and yet even as he breathed the land air, the waves called faintly in his memory, reminding him of tides and tempests, of treasures buried and storms survived. But Krabs was no longer a young sailor chasing fleeting riches. He was a man burdened with knowledge, carrying a secret that could change his destiny. The recipe. It haunted him like a song that refused to fade, echoing in the back of his mind with every step he took. He walked through the town's bustling market square, his eyes scanning the stalls piled with goods, fruits of the sea, barrels of salted fish, baskets of kelp, and trays of steaming rolls fresh from the oven. Customers crowded each stand, haggling, laughing, arguing. The town pulsed with life, its heartbeat steady and strong. As Krabs observed, an idea stirred again. Food. Not treasure, not gold coins, but food, simple, nourishing, yet capable of bringing joy. He remembered the hidden island, the chamber of stone, the formula carved into rock. It hadn't been guarded like mere wealth, it had been protected like something sacred, meant to endure through time. He stopped at a baker's stall, drawn by the smell of warm bread. The baker, a stout whale with flour dusting his apron, smiled broadly. "Fresh loaves, just pulled from the oven. Try a piece." He broke off a bit of crust and handed it to Krabs. Krabs chewed slowly, savoring the warmth, the salt, the faint sweetness. It was simple, yet it filled him with a comfort he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He imagined pairing it with the flavors of the secret recipe, the way the rich patty might rest within bread, turning a simple meal to something extraordinary. The thought lit a fire within him. What if the recipe wasn't just his secret? What if it became the heart of something greater, something that brought sailors, townsfolk, and wanderers alike to his door? A place that would stand firm when ships crumbled and treasure chests rusted. The idea followed him the rest of the day. As he walked the streets, every corner seemed to whisper of it. The laughter spilling from taverns, the hungry workers finishing their shifts, the smell of sizzling fish drifting from seaside grills. Everywhere the town pulsed with appetite and camaraderie, and Krabs began to see where he might fit within it. That night, back at the tavern, he spread a worn piece of parchment on the table and lit a candle. He took up a stub of charcoal and began to scribble. Not maps this time, no winding coastlines, no markers of hidden treasure. Instead, he drew a rough sketch of a building, sturdy, welcoming, with wide doors and a simple sign hanging above. He drew tables inside, a counter, a stove. And at the heart of it all, he placed the recipe. His claws smudged the charcoal, but he didn't care. Ideas spilled from him faster than he could trap them on the page. He thought of the flavor, the sizzle, the way a simple patty might bring joy to those who tasted it. He pictured hungry sailors, tired families, curious travelers, all of them coming to this place, sharing in something that was his but also theirs. For hours he worked, until the candle guttered low. Finally he sat back, rubbing his tired eyes. The parchment was messy, full of crossed-out lines and smudges. But to Krabs, it gleamed brighter than any treasure map he had ever held. It was the map to his future. Yet as he gazed at it, doubts crept in. Could a man like him, scarred by storms, hardened by battles, truly leave behind the life of a sailor? Could he exchange plunder for pots, gold coins for grease-stained aprons? The sea had shaped him, but the recipe was calling him towards something different, something lasting. He thought of the crew he had once sailed with, men who would scatter to the winds, their names lost to time. Their adventures would fade into whispers, their treasure into dust. But this recipe was something that could endure beyond him. Krabs clenched his claw, determination flickering in his eyes. He had chased fortune across endless waves, and at last he understood. Fortune wasn't only gold. Sometimes it was the chance to create something that mattered, something that filled not just pockets, but hearts. He folded the parchment carefully, tucking it into his coat. Tomorrow he would begin. He didn't yet know where or how, but the path was before him, clear as any map. The sea had given him many things, but now it had given him a gift greater than treasure: purpose. As he lay in the quiet tavern room that night, the recipe echoed in his dreams, no longer a whisper, but a steady drumbeat leading him forward. And for the first time in many years, Mr. Krabs slept not with one eye open, but with both closed, at peace with what was to come. The next morning dawned pale and quiet, the mist rising off the sea like the breath of some ancient, sleeping giant. Krabs stood at the edge of the docks, watching the water lap lazily against the wood. The waves seemed gentler now, as if they too knew his days of chasing storms were behind him. Still, his claws twitched restlessly. He had made his choice in his heart, but turning it into reality was another matter. A dream, after all, was only a shadow until one breathed life into it. He began with the basics. He rented a small shack at the edge of town, a squat, weather-worn building with peeling paint and crooked windows. Most saw it as worthless, but to Krabs it was treasure enough. Its beams groaned and its roof leaked when the rain came, but it was his, a starting point. Inside, he cleared out the cobwebs, patched what holes he could, and scrubbed the salt stains from the walls. He worked with the same determination he once brought to mending sails or polishing cutlasses. Every nail he hammered, every board he fixed, seemed to echo with promise. The shack wasn't much, but he saw what it could become. When the townsfolk passed by, some chuckled. Krabs fixing up a shack? What's he up to now? They wondered aloud. But Krabs only smiled, keeping his plans close to his chest. He had learned long ago the value of secrecy, especially when the prize was as valuable as the recipe. At night, when the town quieted and the gulls settled, he practiced the formula. He worked over a crude stove, mixing, testing, tasting. His claws shook sometimes as he adjusted the balance. Too much salt, too little kelp, not enough sea herbs. The smell filled the shack, curling out into the cool night, and occasionally a passerby would pause, sniffing the air with curiosity. Krabs would pretend to be cooking for himself, hiding the parchment with the recipe before anyone could glimpse it. It was too soon to reveal. The world wasn't ready, not yet. Still, the satisfaction of it kept him going. Each time he tasted the result, he felt closer to the secret's heart, closer to unlocking the perfection buried within those mysterious instructions. He could sense it was more than food. It was something that could bring people together, something that could last. Weeks passed. Slowly the shack took shape. A sturdy door replaced the old broken one. A signpost, though empty for now, stood proudly by the entrance. Inside, Krabs built a few rough tables and stools from salvaged driftwood. They were uneven and splintered, but they were enough. And then came the night. The night he tested it beyond himself. He invited a handful of sailors he knew, old friends who trusted him, enough not to ask too many questions. They filed into the small shack, curious and skeptical. The place was humble, nothing like the rowdy taverns they were used to, but there was a warmth in the air, carried by the faint sizzle of a patty on the stove. Krabs worked quickly, his claws steady despite the storm of nerves in his chest. He placed each patty between halves of bread, careful, reverent, as though handling treasure more valuable than gold. When he served them, the room went quiet. The sailors took their first bites, and then their second. The silence broke into murmurs, then laughter, then satisfied sighs. One sailor leaned back, eyes closed, chewing slowly as though savoring every bit. Another slapped the table with delight. "Krabs," one said between mouthfuls. "This is better than anything I've eaten at sea or land." Krabs chuckled, though inside his heart swelled. The recipe was real. It worked. It brought not just taste, but joy. The shack, the stove, the rough tables, they all seemed to glow brighter in that moment. He knew then, without a doubt, that his life had changed. Still, he guarded the parchment closely. He trusted no one with the secret. Not the sailors, not even the baker he bought his bread from. The formula would remain his alone, locked away in claw and heart. It was his anchor, his compass, his future. In the months that followed, word spread. More sailors came, then townsfolk, then travelers passing through. They didn't know the name yet, didn't see the greatness it would one day become, but they felt it. Something new, something different. And Krabs, standing behind his counter, serving patties with a mix of pride and care, began to see it clearly. The shack wasn't just a shack anymore. It was the seed of something lasting, something that would outlive storms and tides, something greater than plunder or gold. One evening, as he closed the doors after another long day, Krabs lingered outside. The signpost still stood empty, waiting. He touched it with his claw, imagining the name that would one day hang there, a name that would carry the recipe into legend. For now, the night was quiet, the stars steady above. He tucked the parchment into its hiding place and turned back toward the shack. His work was only beginning. But in his heart, he knew, the greatest treasure he had ever found was not buried beneath the waves or locked in chests. It was here, in this secret, in this place, in the dream that would one day be known across all the seas. The Krabby Patty. And so, beneath the watchful stars and the endless sea, Mr. Krabs began his new voyage, not as a pirate chasing fleeting fortunes, but as a keeper of a secret, a builder of something eternal. His story, though weary with tides and tired with time, was far from over. It had only just begun.